This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Now, it's important to say at the start of this video that I come at this video from a place of being a huge Mesa Boogie fanboy. The reason that I got into Mesa Boogie amplifiers in the first place was that I was a huge fan of John Petrucci, and presumably if you're watching this video you would have heard of John Petrucci and you would have seen through the years what a disciple of Mesa Boogie he's been, you know, playing the Road King. That was kind of how I knew about the Road King. That's how I knew about the Mark IV, Mark IIc Plus amplifiers. And at the time, so around about my 16th, 17th birthday, the very first amplifier I bought that had proper tubes in it all the way through. Before this, I had a Marshall Valve State AVT 150H head and cabinet. I went to my local guitar shop, which is Manson's, no longer exists. The Nomad 45 they had in there for £750, and the first time that I'd seen a Mesa Boogie in person, and I bought this amplifier. At the time I was playing 7 strings and stuff like that. Now this is the only Mesa Boogie I now have left, except for a Mesa Boogie Subway Blues, which I've actually got on eBay. I bought that one kind of just to see what it was about. But I've kind of fallen out of love with the Mesa Boogie amplifier for a few reasons, and this is kind of a video about that. Now it doesn't mean that I've got a better option for you, because I don't. Because what Mesa Boogies are is quite a special thing in terms of real kind of Swiss Army knives that can do the full gamut of things, you know, a lot of these things, and there isn't too much in the way of competition for Mesa Boogie, and I think that's part of the reason that so many people stick with Mesa Boogie and so many people love them. So there is also some kind of tech side of stuff which I've recently found from Lyle at PsionicAudio that is kind of new information for me, which I'll sort of put towards the end. But before that, I guess let's talk about what a Mesa Boogie is. In general, they are multiple channel amplifiers, right? They'll have switching channels from the first kind of iteration after the Mark 1, which is where it all started. The Mark II, the thing was that it had kind of a clean and dirty channels, right? And you could channel switch them. Now, early on as well, what happened was that this created somewhat of a problem in that the Mesa Boogie had multiple channels, which was sort of a newish thing, I think, at the time. Maybe Dumble at the same time were doing similar things, but then also lots of shared controls. And this is a thing that you definitely find with the Mark series amplifiers from Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, that where you have shared controls, potentially settings that wouldn't sound great on a clean setting sound great with the drive, and vice versa. If you set your thing to sound up good with the clean channel, when you kick over to the drive channels, sometimes you're like, well, you're always in this kind of compromise. Now, for that reason, I think the way that Mesa Boogies tend to do these things, they find a problem and then they engineer over that problem, basically, right? And so then you ended up with the Mark IV, which has loads and loads and loads of controls across the channels, right? So you end up with panels that look somewhat like this. So they're then basically something like having a few different preamps within one amplifier. And for that reason as well, when you look inside them, they're actually very complicated beasts. You know, they're PCB made, which is not always negative. This is another thing that PsionicAudio Lyle has kind of explained, that not all PCB amplifiers are made equal, and there are engineering decisions that they can make. One of the things that Mesa have done, particularly in this amplifier, is the tubes are actually on the PCB, which has not been a problem for me, and this is also a thing that I've not had reliability issues with the Mesa Boogies that I've had. I've had a Mark 1, a Mark 3, or 2 Mark 3s. I've had a Mark 5 25 twice. I've had 3 Mesa Boogie Lone Stars. I've had a Blue Angel twice. I've had a Road King for a second. Now that one, when I first went to pick it up, was dead. I think a fuse had gone on it or something in its tube. What else? An Electrodyne, had no issues with that. So I've had a lot of Mesa Boogies. I've not had reliability issues. Apparently, one of the things that happens with them is that when they fail, they are quite difficult to fix. We'll go on to that a little bit more in the background. The reason that I don't feel like I can fully fall out of love with the Mesa Boogie is because they do so many things, sort of, as I say, like a Swiss Army knife. The kind of downside with it is that sometimes what I've found is that if I compare any one aspect to something else, particularly the clean channels, or the clean channel on this Mesa Boogie Nomad, for instance, it doesn't really speak to me in the same way as something like a Fender Blackface channel or a Matchless Lightning clone, which are the 2 examples that I've got in the room with me. However, what it can do that nothing else that I'm aware of really can is we've got 3 channels on this amplifier. So that's our clean. Channel 2 I've got set up to be a bit more kind of... doing that sort of thing, and then channel 3. Aside from the kind of smooth lead tone, I can't think of an amplifier that can do that kind of smooth lead as well as the Nomad 45 for me. That is the one kind of area that I think this amp does shine for me. I think in general I could find a better clean amplifier. In general I could probably find something that does some sort of mid-gain tones better as well. But finding a package that does it all in one is not so easy, and that is the thing that I think the Mesa Boogie still have a bit of a niche for. But of course you could use pedals, and for me I don't think I could find a pedal that does that channel 3 thing as well as this. But if you had a better clean tone and you chuck on some pedals, like for instance Andy Timmons stopped using the gain channel of his Mesa Boogie Lone Star, which is actually I think probably my favourite Mesa Boogie amplifier. And I think now his lead tone is a combination of the Blues Driver or the Andy Timmons signature drive pedal. I don't think his tone sounds any worse live for not using the lead channel. And the thing that complicates issues a little bit as well more is that if you go into the channel switching thing, you then need to use an effects loop, and apparently that's another thing which is very expensive to get really right. And in the case of this amplifier, it's a parallel effects loop, which can be a little bit strange in some ways and can then cause the helicopter thing if you've not experienced that. It kind of basically, if the level in your effects pedal is too high, it starts to create a feedback kind of loop within the Mesa Boogie, and it starts to spiral up into a load of noise, and then you have to quickly turn off the amp before it turns into a real situation. According to people that know a lot more about this stuff than me, the Mesa Boogie amplifiers are not necessarily, it'd be fair to say they're not that kind to technicians. Oftentimes, apparently, you find the PCB layouts are a little bit illogical, like the traces aren't that easy to follow, versus something like a Sir amplifier. Apparently those PCBs are very well laid out, according to PsionicAudio. As well as, apparently, they use kind of underrated resistors in stuff, which causes some failure, and they mount too close to the board. Those are some of the things that I found. But as well as if you just look at something like a Mark 525, what it looks like is that they've had this great idea for an amplifier. We'll have multiple channels that can do multiple things. We'll stick a reverb in there, but also there's so much circuitry in there that basically it's a real job to work on. And for example, one of the issues that happens with channel switching amplifiers, apparently, it seems to be, is that when you switch between different channels with different amounts of gain, you can get a pop. So this is a thing that Mesa Boogie have worked on over the years. So they have these things that are like complicated muting circuits, and you can watch like the Guitarologist channel, and he took like days to figure out how to diagnose a fault within a muting circuit within the Mesa Boogie. It's not straightforward stuff. However, I think until I find something that can do that many things, I think Mesa Boogie still has to be considered one of these amp manufacturers that really do something a little bit different, I think. Their more recent amplifiers, even the simple stuff seems to actually be pretty complicated when you look at them. So like the Electrodyne was supposedly like a single-ish channel amplifier with shared controls. You had just basically normal controls, and then you look in it and all of the circuits are wired to the same controls, but there's different circuits going on. It's just bonkers. Then you think about something like the California Tweed, you know, basically something like a clean channel of an amplifier, and then you give it, you know, loads of different switching options for the power section. All of their amplifiers seem to have like a little bit of a twist towards complication. I'd be interested, I don't know, maybe it's not a thing that needs to exist, but like a simplified Boogie where maybe the concentration really is on just two great sounding channels that you don't have to worry about so many different things. They are super versatile amplifiers, and for that reason I think loads of people are able to get what they want from them. It just takes a lot of time, or can take a lot of time. Even their simpler designs like the Lone Star, it's like loads of different features that you could get into. You've got thick drive options, normal drive options, thicker drive options. You've got diode tracking on the back, which you can turn on. All of their amplifiers seem to have like a lot of different complications, and I don't know necessarily that it makes it easy to work on for a tech. However, as I say, I can't think of an amplifier, you know, for around the £750 mark that you get that could do that sort of thing if you do like the tones that you get at your Mesa Boogies. Likewise with your Mark IIIs and stuff. Mark III has the shared control, so I found that a little bit less versatile in some ways, although I think a better clean channel than this for sure. The Lone Star I think has a really good clean and drive channel, and that might be the Mesa Boogie that I would own if I had to own one or two. And if I only had to have one amplifier, I still think a Mesa Boogie might be it. Or do you decide, right, I'm just going to go down the Fender Blackface route or a Vox type route and just fully commit to the idea that I'm going to be using pedals up front for your drive? And does that necessarily sound worse? I don't know, but I think I've fallen out of love with Mesa Boogies for some of those reasons. Quite mid-heavy amplifiers in general, not necessarily loads of bass or like snappy bass response or that sort of stuff. Can be quite like a focused sound, especially the Nomad, but sounds great in a mix. You don't have to EQ out low end and stuff. It's kind of mix ready in a lot of ways. They're very heavy amps in general. They use like proper 14-ply birch and stuff like that. Tend to use pretty large transformers. In general, heavy amplifiers, that's another thing that for me is not great, but they also make a head version of most of their amplifiers, so that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Let me know your thoughts. Have you stayed in love with Mesa Boogie? Have you fallen out of love with them? Are you somewhere on the fence with them? I'd love to know your thoughts if you've got them. The Mark series amplifiers for me were pretty close to what I like. I think the Nomad is closest to what I like, or the Lone Star. The rectifier stuff for me was not so much where I'm at. And PsionicAudio did say if you're going for the rectifier type sound, those are based on a Soldano SLO, and if you wanted a very well made rectifier, apparently a Soldano Slow might be the way to go, but probably a lot more expensive than a Mesa anyway. You see a lot of Mesas on the used market as well, which is again one of the reasons that I think I've had experiences with so many of them, because they're quite plentiful and not always super expensive. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you've got a good alternative to a Mesa Boogie, let me know that in the comments as well. I'd love to have an idea of, you know, things that are similar-ish to a Mesa, but kind of do it maybe slightly differently, maybe if you've got suggestions. Anyway, here we go. Cheers.